Google search Cracku CAT mocks. Click on the first link. You can attempt 3 latest mocks in the actual exam interface. After completing the test, you get detailed solutions, analysis, and percentile along with your scorecard to gauge your All India performance. Click on the solutions to get video solutions from our expert faculty.
Hi friends, my name is Maruti and I'm the co-founder of Cracku. In this video, we'll be looking at the analysis of DashCAT 9. Many students have taken DashCAT 9, and if you haven't taken it till now, please go ahead, take the mock, and after you've taken the mock, watch this video. In this video, we'll be looking at all the 3 sections. We'll be looking at verbal, LRDI, and we'll be looking at Quant. So we'll be looking at what are the easy questions, what are the questions that you should have definitely attempted, what are the slightly more medium questions, and what are the banana skins or the very hard questions which you should have definitely not gotten involved with. Now, in each of the sections, we'll also be looking at the 90 percentile score and the 99 percentile score. So let's get started.
Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Saili Kale. So in this particular video, we are going to analyze the verbal section of DC9. This was on the whole a fairly easy verbal section as compared to say DC6, DC7 and DC8. This was I think of the easiest of these 4 DashCATs as such. So this was one section where you should have scored ideally. So if you were not able to score over well over here, you should really consider what are the areas that you are missing out on. Maybe you are making mistakes in elementary areas that you should not be making when it going ahead. So let's take a look at let's deep dive into the section. We'll take a look at all the RCs first and then the VA. So the first RC that I'll discuss is the one based on humiliation. So this was a bit of an historical passage. The author was giving you a historical perspective of a practice, and it was very informative. So when we have passages like this, it is important to remember, because the author is being informative, that you should not try to remember every single piece of information that is given. The passage was also longish, but it was not easy to read but not difficult to read either. It was because it is written in a formal way, it's not easy to read, but it was not difficult to read, as in the language was not overly difficult, flowery, the sentences were not too long. So all of that meant that you could read the passage fairly well. Now, in such cases, all you have to remember is that you should not spend too much time remembering every single part of the paragraphs, every single detail that is given, because such passages are filled with details. So when you have that kind of passages, just write very short gist of every paragraph of the passage. When it comes to informative passage, I generally write down what that particular author is trying to say through the passage. So just write, history of the practice, how the opposition started. So basically you write very short points over there, because in informative RCs there are 2 types of questions that can come: objective questions which are based on details, or subjective questions which are based on the emotions of the author. In this case there was a mix of easy objective and 2 subjective hard questions. For the easy objective questions, what you should just do is remember where all the information is kept. Just say that reasons for X, 3 causes of Y. Once you just note that down, when you get a question based on that, you can go and reread that particular part and then answer. There were 3 easy objective questions that you should not have missed as such, because they were based directly on the passage. If you read the passage, you should not have missed out on that. So if you made errors in any of the 3 easy questions as such, you should make a note of whether or not you are reading either too fast or you're not reading carefully enough as such. So just take this as a test of your reading speed. If you're missing out on easy questions, slow down a bit. There were 2 subjective hard questions, which again basically depends on understanding the implications that the author is trying to say, or essentially implied meaning or inferences based on the passage. This required not the information given, not the details that are given, but just a basic understanding of the emotions of the author. So if you had a handle on what the author is trying to say, those were also easy to solve. But those are essentially not directly verbatim from the passage, you couldn't refer back. So when you are referring to informative RCs as such, just remember you should get the emotions of the author, you should get what he is trying to say, and for the actual details, just remember what details are where. Do not try to commit details to memory, it's an inefficient way of reading passages. So this is basically the thing that you should remember while checking and analyzing your performance in this particular RC. Let's take a look at the next RC, which was that on the one on data. So the data RC was actually easy to solve but difficult to read. It was one of the passages which was A, it was on the longer side, B, It was difficult to read because there was a lot of scientific arguments being made. There were evolutionary biology arguments being made. There were energy based arguments being made, chemistry arguments being made. So it was heavy on science a bit, and the language also wasn't very easy. The sentences at times could be very long. There were even from the starting paragraph you would get this sense that this author is just using a lot of technical jargon at times. So because of that, it was not an easy read, but the questions were on like exact opposite. At times what happens is when the passage is very difficult but objective, then the questions are also easier as such. So do not, you should not have actually missed this particular based on just because it was difficult to read, many people would have given up on reading it, but that should not have been the case because this was one of the easier RCs. There were 2 easy questions as such and 3 hard questions, but the 2 easy questions you would have gotten if you had just read the passage as such. They were kind of questions that you should not have missed at all. So remember, in these kind of cases, you should just remember the key point of each paragraph, because in this kind of passage, you saw that each paragraph very neatly the author is making one clean point. So writing the main point of each paragraph was not difficult. So whenever you are going through something which is data heavy, technical jargon heavy, just write the clean key point that each paragraph is making, and just make sure that you understand what are the easy questions. Anything that you have to back refer to the passage would be an easy question. Just go back and see those particular details and answer the questions. This was slightly more difficult than the than the humiliation as such, but it was still on the easier side as such. I would not say this was a very difficult RC, maybe easy to moderate RC. I would say that this was a RC. If I would actually get in actual CAT, I would be slightly intimidated by the passage, but the passage plus the questions were not difficult at all. Now let's take a look at the third RC that was there, which was based on citations. Now this was not a easy RC as such. This was a difficult RC because all the questions in this were inference based, but actually most students attempted this RC because the length of the RC was short. But the language wasn't easy. The language was essentially slightly flowery. The author used sarcasm quite a bit in the RCs. There was a subjective tone, opinionated tone. There were layered arguments. Because of all of that, even though length was shorter, you would take about the same amount of time to actually read the RC. Also, all the questions were inference based. So here the accuracy was fairly low for most people. So because of that, this was actually one of the RCs which, if you had to skip an RC, I would say you should have skipped this particular RC because it was on the harder side as such. This should have been the last pick because all questions were inference based. You had to like really understand each statement as such. A quick reading of the passage would not have sufficed to answer these questions quickly or answer these questions correctly. You would have understood the passage, understood the main intent of the passage, the meaning of the author, but there were certain phrases, if you didn't understand the meaning of the phrases or you didn't understand the sarcasm behind one line, you would have gotten one question wrong. So you have to always be very careful while reading such passages. So that was the only thing that was slightly tricky. The flowery language, the tone was subjective. There were many parts to it where many traps essentially that a paper setter could set as such. Now let's take a look at the last RC, which was on bias versus noise. This was the easiest of them all. So I would suggest that this should have been the first pick, then humiliation, then the one on data ohm, and lastly the one which was on the citations. So this was actually the easiest RC. Not because the questions were easy, but because this was a familiar topic. Most of, especially if you have some scientific understanding, bias versus noise is something that you would understand intuitively. Basically, the difference between average and variation is something that you can understand. Now, if you understand that concept, this entire RC was on the easier side as such. If you don't understand statistics where what is mean, what is standard deviation, then it would have been a slightly difficult RC for you. So, bias versus noise was an interesting topic, very, very readable, relatable. You know exactly what the author is talking about. There was a humanity to the way the author was explaining the problems also. So because of that, it was very easy to read, very easy to relate to, and very easy to understand. Such kind of RCs you should not miss because you can understand the author very well in such kind of RCs. There were 2 very easy questions and 2 moderate questions, especially if you are not able to get the 2 easy questions as such. Just check your reading speed, check your comprehension skill, whether you should slow down a bit when when it comes to reading. You should not have gotten any question in this particular set wrong. So always check for errors in easy sets. Errors in easy sets are the ones that you should look at to see whether you are going too fast. This should not have been missed, definitely. So RCs on the whole were easy to moderate, I would say. There were some RCs, one RC which was harder, two which were easy to moderate, and one which was easy. Now let's take a look at VA as such. In this particular the parajumbles, there was one easy parajumble which was on space and problems on earth. The reason why it was easy was because there were two pairs that could easily be formed. Once you understand the concept of mandatory pairs, once you could form those two pairs, you had a 50% chance of solving the question correctly. Once you had that, then most people would be able to get the correct order as such. So if you are able to form pairs logically, then you should definitely solve those kind of parajumbles first. With the Zhurong rover parajumble, many people made a mistake, and I think the mistake basically occurred because independent sentences, when you see independent sentences in parajumbles, they tend to throw you out. Especially if there are two independent sentences, it's difficult to understand where it should go. Should this be a conclusion? Should this be an intermediary line? This is the basic reason why many people made a mistake when it came to the Zhurong rover parajumble. There was one extra independent statement and people didn't know what to do with it. So just remember, if you are getting these kind of parajumbles wrong, you should rely more. See, the minute you see that there are two independent sentences, rely more on chain of thought method rather than on grammar, because grammar is not your friend in case where there are many independent sentences. Grammar depends on connecting connectors, conjunctions, etc. And if those are not there, then it's difficult to solve using only grammar alone. So if you are not able to solve these kind of sets, just try the chain of thought method to try to solve parajumbles where there are multiple independent lines as such. When it comes to like the third one, which was mentalizing in autistic people, there are essentially these kind of parajumbles people skip because the sentences themselves are fairly long. It was like each sentence was a fairly long sentence of like 20 words. So 4 sentences like that itself would have taken you more than 1.5 minutes to read and understand. So this was kind of a time sink. It was not a difficult parajumble, but essentially doing this parajumble would mean that you will not be able to do 2 other VA questions. So this was slightly a time sink, but if you are quickly able to go through the sentences, then you would be able to sort this out fairly easily. So always be careful also in picking the parajumble where you don't spend too much time reading also. So this was on the moderate to hard side. Overall, the parajumbles, this part was slightly moderate to hard rather than easy as such. The OOCs were, there was one which was medium hard and the other was easy as such. The one on plastic waste, essentially, if you see the OOC parajumble on plastic waste, you get a mandatory pair between 2 lines and a link also between those 2 mandatory pairs. So once you understand that okay, this and this is part of the pair, this and this is part of the pair, then the one which is odd one out should be fairly obvious. So that is the method you should have used over there. When it comes to Wales, the Wales one basically, it was intentionally designed to throw you off. As in the you had basically a 4 kind of a scenario. You have 1, 2, 3 over here, 1, 2, 3 lines over here, and 2 lines could potentially be the last line. So which one would it be? Then you have to logically infer what can come next. So that is basically what you should always think. Every single preposition matters, every single pronoun matters. You have to be very, very careful when you are in a dilemma like this. Take a look at every single pronoun and make sure that you pay special attention to the pronouns in the lines which could be the alternative lines as such. So overall, even parajumbles and OOC were on the easy side, were not very difficult as such. The para summaries were 2 were easy, 1 was hard. The magma reservoirs was easy. For anybody who has been a science student, this would have been easy because if you know that only waves can have wavelengths, it became a very simple para summary question for most people. Again, over here, always remember when you have a scientific paragraph, the scientific paragraph, always make sure that your you have your eye on the details that are there, distortions that can be introduced. Essentially, you should not focus too much on whether you get all the points in, but whether you get the intended meaning in. Because essentially, when you have a scientific argument, it can be very cleanly cut into a general argument or a general statement without too much loss of information. So do not stress and fret about is the right option containing all the information that is required. Just check whether there is any distortion, remove those wrong answers. Also check whether the intended meaning is conveyed, and that should be enough. The Lucretius problem was also easy because the options were small. The options were short. So when you have few options, you can, and short options at that, you can easily compare between them and see what are the distortions. That is what you should have done. Many people were able to solve this, but the guys who solved it quickly were the ones who actually, they could then use the remaining time for the harder one. The one on para summary, which was based on para summary, or basically the like the nature of beauty as such, which is both subjective and objective, this was a hard para summary, and many people got it wrong. Very few people actually got it right. The reason why many people got it wrong is because the options were, it was difficult to compare the options. The options were, most of the options were partly right. So you would not know exactly which option to eliminate. There was no option which was clearly wrong, or some options are incomplete. Many options were slightly different, slightly similar to each other. So when you have a situation like this, you have to actually first understand what must definitely be there in the right option. If something that must definitely be there in the right option is not there, then you can eliminate the option. So your option elimination strategy should be twofold. One is remove distortions, and secondly remove incomplete options. If you do that basic check, you would be able to narrow it down quite considerably for all para summary questions. So in these kind of situations, when you are getting stuck, when you are getting questions wrong, you should just ask yourself, did I do this? Did I do option elimination correctly? Did I check the what should definitely be, what should mandatorily be in the option? Did I do that check? Did I do distortion check? If you miss doing any of the check, you should just remember, okay, I didn't do this particular check, which is why I got the wrong answer. I should do that in the future. So this was on the whole a scoring section as such. The verbal section should have been a scoring section for everybody. Now in this case, if you, the only thing that mostly you should take out of this particular DC9 is check whether you are missing easy questions. There were quite a few easy questions distributed throughout the section, and you should not have gotten them wrong. Check whether you know exactly all the methods of solving the VA section, the option elimination strategy, considering distortions, figuring out distortions, figuring out incomplete information. All of those basically do this checklist. Okay, maybe I didn't check for distortions, maybe I didn't check for incomplete information. If you are making any of those mistakes, this would be a good time to spot those errors and actually work on them to correct them. So this was the DC9. I hope you guys did well on it. Whatever mistakes you did, take this as a chance to correct on them and come back strong in DC10. Thank you for tuning in.
In LRDI, there were a total of 24 questions across 5 sets. There were 2 sets which had 6 questions, so that is 12 questions, and there were 3 sets which had 4 questions, so that is the remaining 12 questions. The 6 question set, the first one was about an astrologer and about alphabet coding. So basically you had 10 alphabets and you had to figure out which number each of the 10 alphabets represents. Once you get the coding correct, you will get all the 6 questions correct. This set I found to be quite interesting, and normally I attempt these kind of questions even in the examination, because once you get the coding correct, you will get all the 6 questions correct. So you just need to spend around 10 to 15 minutes and you are definitely going to get 6 questions. In this particular question, I think getting the first 2-3 alphabet coding is quite straightforward, but after that I have to think for some time to figure out what the remaining alphabets represent, which numbers they represent. But in my opinion, this is not a very difficult question, especially because it's a 6 question set, which is a group question. That is, once you solve it, you'll get all the questions immediately. So this is a question that I think you should definitely attempt in the examination. On the other hand, we had another question, an arrangements question. This also was a 6 question set. This was about a few people sitting around a circular table across 2 different sessions. So this involved multiple cases. You can figure out and you can eliminate some of the cases, but even at the end, you will get multiple cases. And even the way some of the questions were phrased was tricky. So there was no simple, very direct question about, say, who is sitting where. Some of the questions also involved inferences. Who is not sitting or who is not a neighbor. and who is definitely not a neighbor across any of the sessions. So you have to look at all the different cases and also get a good understanding of what the question actually means. This I think was slightly more trickier than the earlier question. Amongst the two 6 question sets, I would say the second one is definitely more trickier. But I have seen that many people have actually attempted the second set as compared to the first set. I think many people are comfortable attempting arrangement questions, because of which I think many people have attempted this. But it is up to you. It is up to your personal choice. I personally would prefer attempting alphabet coding kind of a question, where once you get it correct, you will get all of them and there is no complications involved. When you are coming to the 4 question set, there were 3 4 question sets. The first one was table based. So basically it is a very lengthy question. It involved internet connections in a city across 4 different locations and 4 different internet providers. So you have to basically draw a table, a 4x4 table, and you have to fill the entire table up. To fill that entire table, you have been given some instructions. But in my opinion, the instructions are very, very long. For you to actually get a handle on what each of the instruction implies and getting a mental map of how each of the number is related to the other, it is going to take you some time. And sometimes you might miss out on some of the information that is actually given in the instructions. This actually happened to me in last year's CAT, where it was a lengthy question and I was trying to solve it, but I forgot to read one of the lines, which had an important clue. So because of that, I got stuck in the set. I was not able to figure out where I'm getting wrong, because I was not able to derive whatever information was expected. So this kind of a thing will happen to you in an examination, especially when there is high stress involved. So ensure that you don't try to pick a lengthy question wherein you might miss out on important clues. But once you get the mental map correct, if you are able to get your composure and if you are able to get read the entire instructions, once you get that part done, solving it is very straightforward. It is a very simple question. The only thing is it is very, very lengthy. So lengthy questions in general, I would say, especially for just a 4 question set, try not to make this the first set that you attempt. Because if you are making this the first set that you're attempting in the examination, and if you get stuck in the middle, like I got stuck last year, you will get very nervous. And that is not a good situation to be in. The next one was a missing table set. This involved, I think, some parameters across 3 different categories over, I think, 8 countries. And once you look at the set, immediately you know that this is a missing table set. And I like solving these kind of sets because they are similar to solving a Sudoku. This is slightly more actually difficult than the earlier set. If you are able to read the instructions of the earlier set, then I think it is very simple to actually solve it. This Sudoku, on the other hand, was slightly more complicated, but there are no traps here. You will never get stuck in the middle. In this question, especially for somebody who solves Sudokus, you will be able to get this question correct definitely within 10 to 15 minutes. So you know that this is a question which doesn't have a lot of traps. You have to just solve it, and you also get the context correct. Once you look at the set, you know that this is a missing table set. And within the first 10 to 15 seconds, your mind is already tuned in. You are trying to solve this set, and there are very few instructions. I think there are 1 or 2 instructions which you'll have to keep in mind, but otherwise it's a straightforward set. So if you can give 10 to 15 minutes, you will get this correct. So this is the kind of set that I would definitely try to attempt first, because I know that after 15 minutes, for sure, I'm going to get this set correct, and then I will be much more at ease. Then I can go and try to solve the remaining sets. The last set was in Venn diagrams. This also involved maxima and minima. There was one 6 question set in DashCAT 8, which was a lot more trickier. And if you haven't attempted it, I would highly recommend you to actually go ahead and solve DashCAT 8, or at least look at the video solution for the Venn diagram question in maxima and minima from DashCAT 8. Because I have explained this in detail there. It is a 40-minute video where I first explained the concept and then I have given the solution for that specific set. But maxima and minima in general involves individual questions. This is, as I mentioned, a 4 question set, and all the 4 questions are individual. Just because you have solved the first question doesn't mean that you'll get the second question immediately. So you have to solve each question separately. So these are the kind of questions that I would recommend you to not attempt at the start, because there are chances for you to make mistakes. Maxima and minima involves a lot of banana skins. This particular set doesn't have a lot of banana skins, but the DashCAT 8 maxima and minima had a lot of banana skins. So in general, maxima and minima, unless you are very comfortable, unless this is something that you really enjoy doing, I would say keep it to the last. Try to solve the remaining sets first, because it will take you a lot of time to solve these questions individually. So overall, I would say the sets that you should definitely attempt. First is the missing table one. Then I think the alphabet coding also should be attempted. Then it is a toss-up between arrangements and Venn diagrams, and finally go to the table-based internet connection set. In Quant, there were 26 questions. Out of the 26 questions, there were 6 questions in theta. and there were 20 MCQs. The split across the different topics can be given over here. In general, I feel that this was definitely more on the medium to difficult sectional. I think this was definitely more difficult than, for example, say DC8. But what we have ensured was that even if the paper was difficult on the whole, there were at least 4 to 5 very simple questions, absolute sitters that we have given. And we have ensured that these sitters were from different topics. The whole point is that we expect sitters to be present even in CAT, and mostly they will be across different topics. So it is always advised that you don't leave a topic completely. You should know the basics of some topic so that if there is a sitter, you will definitely answer it. If you are going through all the different topics, in averages and proportion, there were 2 questions. One of them was fairly easy and one of them was slightly on the difficult side. If you're looking at the split, there was one question on weights. I think there were different weights that were given, and that I felt was very easy. There was one slightly on the more difficult side that was about fruits and some of the water evaporating, which people might have found to be slightly on the more difficult side. In profit and loss, there was one very easy question. I think this involves some ratio and proportion also, but once you know the basic concepts of how you can calculate the cost price of a mixture, you will definitely be able to get it correct. And there was one question in profit and loss, which I think was slightly on the more medium side. But both the questions, the 2 earlier questions, were definitely easy. So if you're looking for sitters, there is definitely one sitter in averages and proportion. I think this involved a classroom where some people leave and some people join and the average weight changes. This should definitely be answered. Similarly, there is one question, as I discussed earlier, in profit and loss, which also should be definitely answered. If you're looking at time, distance and work, there was one standard question. I think this question involved a man, woman and child, all of them working together, and we had to figure out the efficiency or the ratios of the efficiency, which I think was definitely on the easier side. This also, in my opinion, is a sitter because this should be a standard question. Anybody who has attempted 10 to 15 questions in time, speed and work, they will be able to get this question correct. On the other hand, there were 2 questions. There was one question about 2 people running towards each other and then going to a destination and again coming back. That I think was slightly on the more tricky side. I think there was one more tricky question in time, distance and work. This involved, I think, a few pipes. One of them was at a different height and one of them was filling and a few were emptying. So this also involved some calculations. So again, I think 2 questions in time, distance and work were definitely not easy. There was at least one of the questions which I think was on the difficult side. But you definitely have one sitter, and this is a sitter that you should definitely answer. In geometry, there is one question. I think this involved perimeters of squares and hexagons. So very simple question. If you know the area of a hexagon, if you know the formula for it, you will definitely be able to solve this within a minute. So this is definitely a sitter. There is one more question, I think, in geometry, which is slightly on the more medium side, but again, not very, very difficult. I think this involved knowing the number of triangles. It involves some enumeration where you have to figure out the number of triangles with a particular perimeter. I think this involved, obtuse triangles. One thing which I don't want to expand over here, but something that you should know is, if there's a triangle with 3 sides A, B and C, you should definitely know when it is an acute angle triangle, when it is a right angle triangle and when it is an obtuse angle triangle. Once you know this formula, you will definitely be able to solve this question. We can actually expand on it quite fast. If you assume that A is greater than B is greater than C, that is, if A is the largest side, B is the second largest side and C is the third largest side. If A square is less than B square plus C square, this is an acute angle triangle. If A square is equal to B square plus C square, that is a right angle triangle. And if A square is greater than B square plus C square, then it is an obtuse angle triangle. If you know this simple concept, you will definitely get this question correct. But somehow not many people got this correct, even though I felt it was not a very difficult question. Probably I think it was an theta question, so many people might have made some mistake while enumerating. Then if you are coming to logarithms, there is one question which is an absolute sitter. There is, I think, one question where you are given one logarithm of a number in terms of 2 variables A and B, and you are given another logarithm of another number again in terms of, I think, A and B, and you are asked to find out the value of a third logarithm. These kind of questions are definitely expected and you should definitely know them, and they are not very difficult. But I think there is one question in logarithms, which again I think is a theta question, which also involves some enumerations in logarithm and surds, which many people were not able to get it correct, which I think is quite fine. In number systems, probability and progressions, I think many of the questions were slightly on the more difficult side. In probability, there was one question, it was an MCQ question, but very few people attempted it. Many people I think would have just read the question and they are worried about probability and they have left it. which in this particular case is quite fine because the question is not a trivial question. It is not a sitter, it is a slightly complicated question, and there is a good chance you would make a mistake. And if you don't want to attempt a slightly more tougher question in any topic you are not comfortable with, that is completely fine. There are 2 questions in progressions and there are 2 questions in number systems. In progressions, I think there is one question which is quite easy, that involved the number of common terms when you are given 2 arithmetic progressions. Those are the kind of questions that you should definitely attempt. It is a very simple concept, that is, if you are given 2 arithmetic progressions and if you are looking for the common terms, even the common terms form an arithmetic progression. And so you can look at the video solution that I made also, but that is a question that should definitely be attempted. On the other hand, there is a second question in progressions which also involves some logarithms, which I think was definitely on the trickier side. So that question, if you leave, that I think is completely fine. In number systems, I think there are 2 questions. Both the questions were on the medium side. I think one question involved finding the remainder. The exponent of that particular question was not very high. I think it involved two-digit numbers, one raised to the other, and you are asked to find out the remainder when that exponent is divided by a particular 2-digit number. So because the exponent is not very high, I think you should be able to attempt it, but even if you don't attempt it, then it is okay. There is another question in LCM and HCF that I think was a theta question which involved a lot of enumerations. Many people got it wrong, but again that is not a sitter. So people get some questions wrong, and that is a medium level question, so that is fine. If you are coming to functions, this I think was definitely the most difficult topic in DC9. Both the questions were not sitters. Both the questions were definitely on the more difficult side. I think there was one question which involved function of function, which I think many people got wrong. And there was, I think, another question which involved modulus, where you have to figure out the number of solutions when there is a modulus of modulus involved. So again, both the questions were not simple questions. They were definitely not even medium questions. I think they were more on the difficult side. So many people actually found it very hard. Finally, if you're looking at the last topic, which is inequalities, linear equations and quadratic equations. Inequalities, there was a question which on the face of it is not very difficult, but it is an enumeration question. And there are many solutions. The answer is not in single digits or even in double digits. So you have to calculate a number of cases. So many people might have made a mistake in it. So many people got it wrong. In linear equations, there were 2 questions. Both the questions were actually quite similar to each other. You should just know the concept of how to derive a third linear equation when you are given 2 linear equations. That is, suppose you are given 10a plus 12b plus 13c is equal to something, and you are given another number which is say 20a plus 40b plus say 60c is equal to another number. How will you derive a third equation which involves a, b and c? That simple concept, if you know, you will be able to get both the questions correct. And I think that is an important concept. If you have any doubts with it in that topic, you can look at the video solutions. And finally, if you're looking at quadratic equations, there was one question which was fairly straightforward, but there was one question I think which was definitely more conceptual. In general, many people would want to attempt quadratic equations questions quite well because the number of formulas are limited. But this question was definitely more conceptual, and many people have gotten this wrong. That is okay. If you are having any doubts with this, I have explained the concept also quite well. So go through it. If you are coming to the cutoffs, this being a slightly more difficult section, I would think the 90 percentile will be around 22 marks. 22 marks I think will get you 90 percentile. And for 99 percentile, I think you would definitely need around 40 marks.